Hello again and welcome to week 2, lesson 5. This is going to be your final lesson of the week and I'll explain why at the end of the lesson. So this lesson is an introduction or a reintroduction to scenarios. I'm not quite sure how much work you've done with that with Miss Brady the other class. So we're looking at scenarios, but we're going to base it on the work that we've been doing in the last week or so. Here we go. So what is a scenario question? A scenario question is usually the final 2 or 3 questions that you'll find in the higher PE exam or the assignments or the evidence gathering tests that we're going to be doing in school when you return to the building. It usually contains a picture or extract from feedback or quotes. These won't necessarily be from a sporting activity that we have covered. Often it's not. That's the point in it. The SQA want to test your understanding and your ability to apply it to different contexts, which means basically different things. Not simply your ability to memorise answers to standard questions. This is what the scenario section is all about. It is usually the worst answered question across the country. This is mentioned in the report of the marking at the end of the year, and also when I've been marking myself in the higher papers. It's never done well. Now, whether this is because it's probably the most challenging question, but also it's the last question in the exam and people kind of run out of steam by the end of it. But you really need to make sure that you give it a good stab and you understand at least what you're trying to do with the scenario question, because it's usually worth about 6, 8 or 10 marks, which could be, 20% of your final mark, which is a lot. So here's some examples to give you an idea of what you would see at the end of that. These are in the past papers, which again you can find in files. I've put them in there for you anyway, but let's have a look. So here's the first one. You would see pictures there, and there's also quotes to learn from. I'm not going to read them out, all of them out, but I'll read this one out. So you've got pictures there of teamwork going on, and its participation in an activity is rarely carried out in complete isolation. This can be training, practicing, or performing with, against, or in front of others. So you've got a golfer there and there's a crowd. You've got a team there in a huddle, they're working together, and you've got a ballet dancer there who's been supported by the coach. So it's like participation is rarely carried out in complete isolation. The presence of others can be positive or negative. And then the questions go on to ask you there, so thinking about what you've just seen above there, explain why the presence of others can positively and negatively impact performance, practice or training. In your answer you must refer to social factors and one other factor from mental, emotional and social. So the first thing that you should be doing is looking at the command word and knowing that you're going to have to structure answers in the way depending on the command word. And the second thing you should be doing is looking at the factors that it's asking about and also the concept that it's asking about. But I'll pick an easier one to move on to there. So the next one that you've got here, this is from 2017. It's whilst carrying out a personal development programme, data is gathered to show the impact it has had on the whole performance. The data shows there's been very little improvement. So you've got a tennis player sitting there with his head in his hand, he's not happy at all. Now, if you weren't prepared for a scenario question, you might be thinking, but I don't do tennis. Well, it's got nothing to do with tennis at this point in time. And you can see that when you look at the question that's come up next. 4A, explain why there may be little improvement in the whole performance. In your answer, you must refer to emotional factors and one other selected from mental, physical or social. So basically, you're saying what impact do emotional factors and one other factor have on performance for 8 marks. So you'd have to have 4 marks for the emotional factors and 4 marks for the physical, social or mental factors. So you're breaking it down and you're using factor, context, impact and giving 8 FCIs. 4 for emotional and 4 for one other choice. That's all it is. Question B therefore, B is for each of the factors used in part A, evaluate possible approaches which could be used to ensure future performance will improve. So if you'd chosen the emotional factor there and your personal development plan, for example, was, I think the volleyball class you did PMR, and my class, the emotional factor of confidence, you did positive self-talk. You just have to evaluate using IJV those approaches. And from one other factor there, you got the mental factor. You all did better movers and thinkers to improve your cue recognition. Again, you'd have to evaluate that development approach by using I, J and V. So you're saying the good and bad things about it. Hopefully the only thing you'd be saying is good things about these approaches, because of course it's saying to ensure future performance will improve. So you're looking for the good things about better movers and thinkers and PMR and positive self-talk. Okay, that's one scenario. So it's using the information that you've got. It's nothing to do with tennis, even though the picture suggests that, but you're just focusing on the questions. Next one here is a performer is injured whilst participating in the activity. The injury stops the performer from taking part in any form of training, practice or the full activity for 2 months. And I remember this when our old classes went into the exam, they came out and they're like, we don't know anything about injury. Doesn't matter, you're trying to apply your knowledge there. So describe the possible challenges a performer may face when returning to training, practice and or the full activity. In your answer, you must refer to physical factors and one other selected from mental, emotional, social. So all you're doing at that point is basically saying, my factors may have returned to the state that they're in before I developed them. This would be the impact on performance of this in a descriptive way. You don't need to break the answer down into factor, context, impact, but you're just saying, because I haven't practiced, my cue recognition is terrible again, and this is the impact they have on performance for 4 marks. And then for the physical factor, which it demands there, you'd be talking about how what did we do in volleyball, in netball, you'd be talking about speed. My speed has returned to the state that it was in prior to my training, and this is the impact that poor speed could have on performance. For volleyball, I believe it was your agility. You'd be saying my agility would return to the state that it was in prior to we did the PDP, so this is the impact that the agility had in performance. And by the time we finish softball as well, you'd also have examples for softball for that point as well. So again, no need to refer to an activity, but that's just what you would do. Then for 4B, it says for each of the factors used in part A, explain what a performer may consider important when planning and carrying out a performance development plan following a period of injury. Now you just use your knowledge of what you should consider when planning out a PDP. That would be goal setting, the principles of effective practice, the principles of training, which would be specificity, progressive overload, reversibility, and tedium. That would be really, really important to consider progressive overload, because you don't want to overload it too quickly, particularly if you've been injured. And it should be specific to your level of ability, particularly if you've been injured. And you should obviously consider reversibility. You've been out of training for a wee while, so you don't want to return at a very high level, you must take it backwards. So all of these things that we've studied and went over, those are the things you consider. So often, the scenario question at the top is just a kind of setting the scene thing. You're just pulling out all the information that you know already and trying to apply it to it. You know more than you think. And the last one here from 2019, well, it couldn't have been 2019 because it was an exam, I don't know what this is from, but it is one of the exam papers, is the extracts below are taken from an interview with a coach. Extract 1. Performance in training indicates progress is being made, but in the live performances, results continue to deteriorate. Extract 2. More errors are observed, especially towards the end of live performance. That suggests they're tiring. In the first one, it suggests they're perhaps getting anxious in front of a performer, which would be good because we're just moving on to anxiety and softball, so you're going to have knowledge for that one there. So 7A is read extract 1 and answer the following question. Explain the reasons why emotional factors may cause the difference between training and live performances. So this is only worth 4 marks. So all you would have to do is you would talk about either your confidence, which is what we did in netball, and explain the impact using FCI of confidence on performance. Or if you were doing volleyball, you'd talk about anger, how you get frustrated when you perform in front of a live audience because you feel you're getting judged, and these are the 4 impacts, FCIs, that it would have on performance. And then once we've done the softball block, you'll be able to explain why anxiety, which would obviously come about if you're being watched, would have 4 FCIs on performance. And then B is read extract 2 and answer the following question. That would be analyse the possible impact of physical factors on live performances. So basically you're just breaking down of two physical factors. You could do 2 or 1 in live performance. It's really got nothing to do with the live performance. You're just saying what is the impact of physical factors on performance. Now, we would talk about your agility if you did volleyball, you would talk about your speed if you did netball, and you're going to talk about your skill repertoire if you want to talk about that for softball. And it's just really important that you're changing your FCI into your analyse and making it work. So we won't go into that just now because we'll come into that another later date, but let's begin to look at how we're going to do this. So what to consider when attempting a scenario. You should really look at the command word. Take note of the activity that's being mentioned, but it's not going to definitely be relevant because they can't put out one activity on a piece of paper in the exam and expect the whole country to have covered it. So the activity isn't that relevant. Just take a note of what the scenario is asking about. So you really need to pay attention to the concept that the scenario is asking about. Are they asking about the impact of a factor on performance, or are they talking about data gathering, or are they talking about the principles of practice of the training? I've put the wrong principals there. That means your principal teacher. It should be principles, P-L-E-S at the end there, wrong one. Again, it's about, actually what time is it? It's 9:30 at night, I'm not changing it. Is it about the development approaches? Is it about goal setting? Is it monitoring and recording? Or is it about evaluating PDP? So you're beginning to give a wee picture in your mind of what they're asking about there. And really be creative and confident to give it a go and extend your answers. Don't give me short answers of what you can remember. Think about it and be creative and answer with full long answers. Obviously the command word's going to dictate what structure you do that in, but it doesn't mean that you have to have really short, stubbed answers there. Go for it and just extend your answers and think. It's really painting your own story here. Right. Here's my example data gathering scenario that you're going to be using to complete as part of your task and assignment today as a quiz there. So if this was our model exam here, fake exam that you're coming back to school to do, you would see at the page, coach feedback, you don't seem sure that your PDP is working. The coach would also be saying, your PDP isn't working. They might also say, you seem to be finding this development approach too hard. And then lastly he said, are you sure you gathered reliable data to create this PDP? Now firstly I point out that this would be a pretty mean coach, there's not a lot of positives to take from that. But they're basically saying the PDP isn't working, it's too hard for you. Are you sure you gathered reliable data to create this PDP? So the suggestion is that the data you gathered was false, and you've maybe made your results look far better, so you've actually planned a really difficult development program to work on, and you're not able to cope with it. So that's the suggestion. So 7A is evaluate the reasons why the performer may have gathered unreliable data. So we're going to pick the emotional factor here. So we're going to evaluate why our test may have gathered unreliable data for that first question. So we're looking for 4 IVJs, or IJVs there, sorry. We're looking at 4 IVJs as to why a data gathering method might have gone wrong. Okay? And 7B is explain the changes the performer would make to ensure their data gathering method would be reliable data. So let's take a look at that a little bit further. So 7A is asking, evaluate the reasons why the performer may have gathered unreliable data for the emotional factor. So it's asking about the data gathering method, which we've just covered this week, so that should be fresh in your mind, all these answers that we've been looking at this week. So you can be talking about the SCAT test, or the POMS test, or our confidence inventory for my netball girls. The question's asking you to evaluate it, so we're identifying what would be bad about the test. The judgment would be, what would this cause, and value, what would this increase, decrease, maintain, speed up, slow down as a result of this. So basically you're using the knowledge that you've learnt this week and applying it in a way that you're answering this question here, which is relevant to this scenario. So it's all the bad things about a test that could have gone wrong. So that's what you should be attempting at that one. Example answer for 7A. So I've given you one example. which is telling you that you're only going to have to give 3 other marks for 7A. It's identify. They may have used a scat test, which you've all done now, on a computer that wasn't portable. So you have to put that into place. That's the part that you're making up. Like you all did have a portable scat test. Some of you printed it off, some of you had it on an iPad, and you were able to move about with it. But because of the scenario, it's not gone well. You're having to say, they may have used a scat test on a computer that wasn't portable. The judgment of this is there then, so they may not have been able to concentrate if they were in a noisy or busy room. Okay? The value of that is meaning the data gathered may not have been accurate to create a reliable PDP with, which is the values that you've known and done this week all along. So the only part that you've had to be creative with is you've had to imagine why there is problems with any of these tests. Why are there problems with them? And you know majority of them already. It's just it might have gone well for you, but you have to think about why wouldn't it have gone well. You've got 3 other answers to give for that. So you must stick with an emotional data gathering test there. So you're talking about the SCAT test or the POMS test or the confidence inventory, but all the answers are very similar. But be creative as to why they might go wrong. Okay, and next one. 7B. Explain the changes the performer would make to ensure their data gathering method would gather reliable data. So again, it's asking about a data gathering method. You're beginning to get that image in your mind there. It's about the emotional factor, the SCAT test, you use the POMS test, the confidence inventory, and it's asking you to explain. So we need to use a P chain. It's not an impact on performance question, it's about data gathering, so we use PEE. You have to make a point, give an example, and explain what's the impact it would have. Your point would be, could they make changes to the method, protocol, procedures, or setup of the data gathering method? So you just need to point that out. They could make that change to this. The example of that would, what would this be? So they could do this instead of that. And the explain would be, what impact would this have on gathering reliable data to base a PDP on or swiftly move on to a PDP? So, here's an example answer for 7B. Point. The performer could make a change to the method they use to gather data prior to using this. So, they could adapt it, is basically what they're saying. You could also say, I could make a change to the setup, I could make a change to where I did it. It's up to you. The example would be, if it were on a computer, they could print it off to take it into an isolated and quiet area. That's the example of what they could do with the method to make it better. The explanation for this, which is the impact, is meaning they will be able to focus on their answers, allowing them to gather accurate data and create a reliable PDP. Now, based on your other lessons this week, don't forget to put that much information in. It's all about getting onto this reliable PDP to start improving, but also creating this reliable PDP. So all you've got to do for 7B is give me 3 more answers. What else could they do to the data gathering methods to make them better based on what you'd said in 7A? So you're thinking about things like, did you save it? I.e. permanent record, what could they do? Did you understand the questions in it? What could you do? The performer could look it up on the internet and try and find out what some of the questions mean, or ask someone for some assistance in doing that. It's all real relative things. Some of you did ask me how to complete things. Some of you did ask me if it had to be stored. So think outside of the box, be creative. Basically 7A is what's wrong with these data gathering. What could be wrong 4 times with these data gathering methods? And 7B is basically what can they do to overcome it, but using the breakdown of these questions with PEE and IJV. If you're stuck, read over this again, listen to me again on here. I know I talk quite fast, but that's a 20-minute lesson gone already. And because of that, after you've gone and completed your assignment to find week 2 lesson 5 quiz, this is going to be the last kind of lesson that I'm going to give you this week. And if you do find that you have time in the 6th period of PE this week, either catch up on work if you've not had the time, because obviously I'm not expecting things to come in straight away or on time every time. I know you've got ever-changing schedules and different demands in the house and different things going on other subjects. So take this period to catch up on work, whether it's our work or somebody else's, that's fine. Go out for a walk, get outside, or have a relaxing bath or something. Just do something for you in the 6th period, whether that's clearing your head of work, or clearing your work so you can get it out of your head. That's all I want you to do. But in the meantime, before you do that, the period 6, finish this by going to assignments and find week 2, lesson 5 quiz. Be confident, be creative, and extend your answers. Use your knowledge of the command words and data gathering. You've used it all week. It's very similar, hint, hint. But be a little more creative when it comes to the scenario. And lastly, make mistakes. That's the point in doing these tasks, so you can get feedback and learn from it. It's about learning. It's not about labeling you as not knowing it. So allow me to give you feedback. Don't just leave it blank, but give it your best. Okay? Take care, everyone.